Welcome to Rotting Jewels. My name is Dana. For new visitors, I have almost 2 years worth of what I refer to as active research on the topic we're going to discuss today on my YouTube channel, which will be linked in the description along with my link tree. We are going to continue a very long journey of challenging the public consumption narratives of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. You may have heard of them, or may know them under their modern-day iteration, the Best Friends Animal Society, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. In order to challenge the aforementioned public consumption narrative, as in the narrative spoon-fed to the public, we need an idea of how they came to be, what they believe, what they strike down as satanic panic conspiracy theories, and why they tried to distance themselves from the humble 37,700-acre animal sanctuary tucked away in what was once referred to as Little Hollywood in Kanab, Utah. We continue this journey by asking one question.
What is the process?
Oh, must we drag all that up again?
Is it old to the death? Better hold your breath. In this cell, I prevail. Freddy sent from hell. Ring the bell when you're finished. I'm a grown man and winning. Sacrifice it to the demons. Know I love it when you screaming. Commit to your thought. Do it now what you lost in the darkness. You will never wake up so conscious, anxious. Why are you so scared of feeling pain, bitch? Devil in your soul. Cut it now and then you'll go. Walk on the dark path. Kill and you feel that. Never in your life you gotta rush from the kickback. Matte, blank, black, 10 knife on the neck, man. Hear the whispering, devil taking over them. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair? Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair?
Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling you the devil's work.
What is the process? What is the process?
Had to confuse you.
December 11th, 1967, in the parish of Orleans, one Tommy Jude Bomer Jr. of JFK fame incorporated the Process Church of the Final Judgment as a religious, non-profit corporation for the next 99 years.
In England, to be a church, you have to be a church for 100 years before you can actually legally be a church. And in America, it's much easier. That's when we became the Process Church of the Final Judgment.
Hallelujah, the Lord above is coming to you, to burn your eyes, to burn your soul, in the hour of your salvation.
Our quest was to find the elect.
We were looking for the people of God, people who will come with us to the new world, whatever that is. So we weren't really trying to convert people.
It was almost like we were trying to turn people off, and the people who got through that were the elect.
It was understood that the process is the presence of God upon earth, quote unquote. We are it. And Robert was the Christ, the Messiah.
The leap from Mayfair to the Bayou is a large one, and, as the old saying goes, follow the money. As we discussed in the last episode, the looming public relations and likely legal debacle with the British Medical Association was the true impetus for the group's well-known exodus to the Yucatan and beyond, but, as with any business-savvy cult or intelligence operation, money comes first. While the paper trail at this time in the group's history is scarce, what little we do have requires close inspection. The business the process was operating under in London. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't called the Process, the Church of the Final Judgment, or Compulsions Analysis. It also isn't discussed in the church's history. We have one Ed Sanders, author of The Family, to thank for this information. The tale of the process globetrotting from London to New Orleans will require more than one episode, with numerous sources I will cite throughout. Let's begin, as we have before, with Timothy Wiley and Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. By the end of 1966, we had settled back into the comparative luxury of carpeted rooms and a roof over our heads, the whole community now crammed back into the Balfour Place mansion. It also marked the point at which we started seeing far less of Marianne and Robert, who now spent most of their time up in their apartment at the top of the house. Money needed to be made to support what we increasingly thought of as a white elephant. I recall thinking of the absurd contrast between the simplicity of how we lived at Stuhl and then our coming back to this preposterous building in the most expensive part of London.
They were living in an abandoned factory right on the coast, under the most austere conditions you can imagine. They were the slimmest, most dried out people you ever saw, and they were really in danger of starvation. I don't know how they lived. I mean, they just lived under the shelter of the bits of roofs there were. It was like something from the Middle Ages. They had these great bloody dogs. Oh my God. The dogs were well fed. I don't know how they managed it. The people were all wan and faded and thin, and these dogs were huge. And they were all named after biblical characters. The biggest one of all was called Satan, of course.
When the Omega, what Marianne and Robert were now calling themselves, started retiring to the privacy of their apartment, they left the making of the money and the day-by-day running of the place to the rest of us. Marianne kept a firm hand on what was going on within the community through a series of proxies, the 4 or 5 women who had become close to her over the previous years. This point can also be seen as the start of the matriarchy. These were the women who now wielded the power directly devolved from Marianne. This was a pattern that was to follow the process through its various iterations. I'd like to pause here for a moment. It's very clear throughout all of Timothy Wiley's writings that he held a deep disdain for Marianne up until the time of his death. I don't see Marianne as the nefarious hand that both choked and fed the process, but his acknowledgement of the development of a matriarchy within the cult, I believe to be accurate. The pattern does indeed follow the process to Best Friends Animal Society today. Back to Wiley. We worked hard in London to put what we had learned into action, creating empath sessions that were extensions of the e-meter sessions we had been running on each other. We had stopped using the e-meter while we were still in London, and had redesigned it and renamed it the Peace Scope. The mechanism was, of course, exactly the same as the e-meter, only the look of it was altered. And the lines of questions we worked with were no different from those we'd used with the e-meter. The P-scope didn't last long, since by now we'd gained more confidence in our natural skills. Our telepathic and empathic abilities had become more finely tuned after all that we had been through.
Hurricane Inez really consolidated our belief.
This was something huge. This was important for the world. That was some mission, I guess, that we needed to do.
The process were the actual chosen beings of God come to announce and facilitate the ending of all humanity.
We're special, you know. Yeah, we got a message. We're coming down off the mountain.
We no longer needed a machine to hide behind. Having dispensed with the P-scope, we tested one another with the accuracy of what we were telepathically picking up from the other person. This faculty, which grew surprisingly with time and practice, was to serve us well in America when we started giving these sessions to the general public.
And they had this kind of very recognizable mannerism of the unblinking eye.
I gather that they were under the impression that they were communicating telepathically with one another, so there was this kind of super mind going on in the middle of Mayfair.
Returning to civilization did bring some unexpected compensations. Another way in which Marianne indulged her whim of the moment was to order a regimen of vitamin pills. A laudable project if each individual were to take the specific vitamins appropriate to his or her metabolism, but, like so much of what went on in the process, it would have been Mary Ann who prescribed the handful of pills and capsules we were required to take daily, and we all took the same vitamins and doses. Me speaking. Those that are familiar with Scientology's practices may have heard of the purification rundown. In the simplest terms, basically detoxifying yourself with vitamins and a whole lot of sweat.
The 20th century brought miraculous changes in technology and industry. Again and again, science refashioned or outwitted nature to improve our health and comfort. But as the years passed, a cloud gathered around this progress. Our environment and our bodies began to react to something new in man's history. A continuous assault of man-made drugs, toxins, and radiation. This assault is massive, with a multitude of synthetic chemicals in use and new chemicals introduced each day. There is no way to avoid exposure to toxins, pesticides, drug residues, and chemicals that come to you in the food you eat, the water you drink, and the air you breathe. In the face of such a widespread array of drugs and toxins, one can feel a bit overwhelmed. But there is a solution. It is the Purification Rundown. The Purification Rundown is an all-natural regimen. During the program, you take vitamins, you do moderate exercise, and you sweat out the drugs and toxins in a dry heat sauna. It not only rids your body of the effects of drugs, but also clears the path towards spiritual progress and mental clarity. It makes you feel so much more alive. It is revitalizing. The simplicity and power of it is immeasurable.
This practice was not popularized yet by Scientology in our timeline, but there is an interesting parallel to the process's headquarters, aka Scientology, that I would like to highlight. From Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller. In March 1957, the Church of Scientology adopted a compensation scheme known as a proportional pay plan, under which Hubbard would henceforth receive, in lieu of salary, a percentage of the church's gross income. The effect was dramatic. Before the end of the 50s, the founder of the Church of Scientology would be coining around $250,000 a year, a great deal more than the President of the United States. By April, it seemed that Hubbard had given up his heroic, single-handed attempt to rid the world of nuclear weapons by as-ising the atomic bomb, for in that month he hired the Royal Empire Society Hall in London in order to preside over the London Congress on Nuclear Radiation and Health. The various lectures delivered at this extraordinary event were later condensed into an even more extraordinary book titled All About Radiation, and written by a nuclear physicist and a medical doctor. The doctor was anonymous, but the nuclear physicist was none other than L. Ron Hubbard, offering the benefit of his advice with customary scant recourse to the laws of science. He asserted, for example, that a 16-foot wall could not stop a gamma ray, whereas a human body could. An assertion later described by an eminent radiologist as showing complete and utter ignorance of physics, nuclear science, and medicine. In line with his philosophy that most illnesses were caused by the mind, Hubbard avowed, "The danger in the world today, in my opinion, is not the atomic radiation, which may or may not be floating through the atmosphere, but the hysteria occasioned by that question. Radiation," he added, "was more of a mental than a physical problem." Fortunately, however, no one needed to worry about radiation, since Hubbard had devised a vitamin compound called dianosine, after his first child by Mary Sue, which provided protection. Dianosine runs out radiation, or what appears to be radiation. It also proofs a person against radiation to some degree. It also turns on and runs out incipient cancer. I have seen it run out skin cancer. A man who didn't have much liability to skin cancer, only had a few moles, took dianosine. His whole jaw turned into a raw, massive cancer. He kept on taking dianosine and it disappeared after a while. The doctor, writing under the pseudonym Medicus, confirmed in his section of the book that some very recent work by L. Ron Hubbard and the Hubbard Scientology organization has indicated that a simple combination of vitamins in unusual doses can be of value. Alleviation of the remote effects and increased tolerance of radiation have been the apparent results. The FDA in the U.S. was inclined, after studying a copy of All About Radiation, to disagree. FDA agents swooped on the Distribution Center Inc., a Scientology company in Washington, seized 21,000 dianosine tablets and destroyed them, alleging that they were falsely labeled as a preventative treatment for radiation sickness. Was Mary Ann simply adhering to Scientology beliefs with this vitamin regimen? The process themselves repeatedly state that they were certain that the world was ending.
Death, death, death. punishment and doom, death.
We were a bit apocalyptic, and end of the worldy and so on.
Returning to Love, Sex, Fear, and Death, we had left a small group in Stuhl to maintain the place and rebuild after the hurricane. At some point, when the Omega and the pairs were searching Europe for our Shangri-La, an instruction must have gone through ordering the Stuhl contingent to move with the dogs to America and start a chapter in New Orleans. Me speaking, leaving a portion of the group in Stuhl, which we will eventually discuss their time in Stuhl, but while traveling through Europe on the hunt for the processi in Shangri-La, cost money, since, likely to the process's dismay, they couldn't teleport. So, what was the business venture funding this operation? Or, based off of my research, the better question to ask is, what initial shell company was being used? The company name used by the process in London in 1966 was RMS and MA de Grimston Limited. The name leaves much to be desired in the creativity department, but that's just me. This documentation was filed on February 28, 1966. We will not be reading through every page, as much of it is the typical legal type of language regarding assets, liabilities, and stocks. The primary object for which the company was established is what's most striking to me. The document reads, "To conduct, carry on, publish, disseminate, and apply any and all kinds of processes and research with reference to the human body, mind, spirit, and soul in all their ramifications." That sounds pretty official, like maybe Hubbard gave orders for them to start a cult, but that's just my opinion. The documentation jumps to March 31st, 1968, in which the company is listed under a new name, Doubleys Limited. The following first annual director's report covers March 23rd, 1966 to March 31st, 1968. Yes, dear listener, we're going back to New Orleans in 1967, but remember, this is their official paperwork on their home turf. So what do they have to say? The company was formed to provide the framework for the conduct of the business of a group known by its members as the Process. The original members of this group came together in June of 1963 with the intention of carrying out research in the field of the human spirit, body, and mind, and of helping each other and others to achieve their aspirations to serve God. From an early point, the theme and orientation of the work of the group has been religious, a fact which, more recently, has been recognized by making formal application to the charity commissioned by the Process, Church of the Final Judgment, for recognition of the charitable status and aims of the organization. Me here. I said just a few moments ago about the possibility of Hubbard giving them orders to start a cult, the de Grimstons. In this official document, they state that they came together in June of 1963. The de Grimstons were not declared suppressive people until 1965. I point out these discrepancies as we work through this documentation to show how inconsistent the story is, and anyone who's vaguely familiar with the practices of Scientology, when the de Grimstons were declared suppressive people, technically they became fair game.
Gerald Armstrong says leaving Scientology in 1982 wasn't that easy for him. In litigation, Armstrong testified he wanted out after working for Hubbard and discovering documents that showed the church founder lied about his background and achievements. As Armstrong explained in the lawsuit, when he left Scientology, he felt he needed to take that so-called proof as protection. That got him sued by the church, labeled an enemy of Scientology, and allegedly made a target of the fair game doctrine.
The actual fair game doctrine states that someone labeled an enemy may be tricked, cheated, lied to, stolen from, sued, or destroyed by any means by any Scientologist.
And if they were using the e-meter without old Hub's permission, why didn't the church go after them? Why didn't they get in more trouble? Continuing the document, as the group became more close-knit and as the number of members grew, the volume of business activity increased. In particular, courses and personal communication were being run for the benefit both of the members and of the public. Publication and distribution of the organization's literature was undertaken, and the headquarters of the organization were established at No. 2 Balfour Place. The making of a financial profit for the benefit of the members was not the aim of the organization, although naturally income was received from some of its activities, and your directors were always careful to ensure that the level of income from the activities were sufficient to finance the projects undertaken. Throughout the period covered by these accounts, the full-time members of the process contributed to it all their money and worldly possessions, and on January 1st, 1968, the full-time members came together and formally constituted the Process Church of the Final Judgment and undertook formal vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Your company, therefore, was originally formed and has since continued to handle the business, financial, and legal aspects of the communal religious life of the members. The first directors of the company were R.M.S. de Grimston and Mrs. M.A. de Grimston, who were appointed on the 25th of March, 1966, and resigned on the 30th of December, 1968. Within a year of being incorporated in New Orleans, Robert and Mary Ann stepped down. Why? At this point, I can only offer opinions as to the reasoning, likely to distance themselves in the event of bad press, which we will encounter quite a few of those situations down in our timeline. But there is also the consideration of plausible deniability. The further that the leaders distance themselves from the remainder of the group, you can't blame them if they didn't know, right? They state in the documentation that the constitution of the process was created in 1968. The New Orleans filing shows that this is a lie, but let's go ahead and see what they had to say in 1968. The Process Church of the Final Judgment consists, at the date of this constitution, of those who have been members of the organization that was formerly known as the Process, and subsequently of those who joined the church. From its beginning in London in 1963, this organization was devoted to the development of the spiritual and religious life of its members, and to helping others to gain a deeper knowledge of God and His purpose. Until now, the organization was not known to the world as a church, but in recognition of the fact that all the purposes, aims, and activities of the organization are in every respect those of a church, it has now been decided to change the name and title of the organization to the Process Church of the Final Judgment and to adopt this constitution as the founding document. Declaration. The Process Church of the Final Judgment was called into existence by God to serve Him in these latter days and to prepare the world for the judgment that is to come.
Satan's army is ready in the field, and slaughter is the order of the day.
1. That the Spirit of Christ is manifest again within the world in preparation for the final judgment that shall come upon all men. 2. That before the ending of the world, the army of God shall be joined together upon earth, and that it is the duty before God of the church to play its part in the gathering together of His servants, and to this end to make known the teaching and knowledge of the church to all who will receive it. 3. That the word of God shall be followed and obeyed by His people, and that this is revealed both in the Holy Bible and also by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, as it is from time to time received by His servants.
Dear Sir, are you seriously suggesting an alliance between God and the devil to bring about the end of creation? If so, by what benighted kind of logic do you arrive at this conclusion?
No logic. God-given knowledge.
4. That there exists a natural hierarchy of beings within the universe of God, and that this hierarchy, as created by God, is the instrument of the fulfillment of His purpose and is the channel of the revelation of His Word. The objects of the Church are as follows. 1. The advancement of the true Christian religion.
The most important thing about these gods of ours was not so much that they were kind of real, sitting up there. They were never really worshipped per se, but they were basic patterns people take on. And my own feeling was that these were much more valuable as ways of recognizing types of people and methodologies than they ever were as a sort of a theological base. Although we had these Sabbath assemblies.
Christ and Satan joined, soul and body one. God's will fulfilled, the new age shall be born.
2. To spread the truth and word of God in all parts of the world. 3. To guide, teach, and instruct the members of the church in the service of God and His purpose, and particularly the brethren of the church, so that they may be able to fulfill the duties of the priesthood. 4. To conduct research into the knowledge of God and of Christ, and into the workings of the human mind, soul, and body. 5. To preach, speak, and disseminate the knowledge of the church to all who will receive it. And 6, to further the above objects by all appropriate means. Me speaking here. They changed the language of their declaration shortly after the Cielo Drive murders, and while that timing may seem irrelevant right now, dear listener, the closure of one of their chapters and some very interesting information that Ed Sanders retrieved in his investigation will require us to discuss this much more deeply at another time. In 1966, they claimed to have a balance of 11,357 pounds in this audit under financial information. Converting that to today in American dollars, because I'm in the United States, adjusted for inflation, is equivalent to $138,634. That is a lot of scratch for a little cult.
To me, the process was intriguing to just see it. It was dark and everybody had on black, and they were like hippies that worshiped God and Satan. I thought, well, there's a concept that you can, how can you lose if you believe in both?
From their balance sheet dated September 4th, 1870, the robes that the process wore, they list in their assets, which cost 726 pounds at that time, in US dollars, was $7,477, adjusted for inflation. That's a lot of money for those robes. I'm sorry, I had to be petty and include it.
But I always thought that the cloak was a mistake because you can't be threatening wearing a cloak. Ever. It's a bad fashion choice for a Satanist.
Alright, so we've got the paperwork out of the way from the UK. Let's go back to Timothy Wiley and Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. To everyone's surprise, after beating our heads against the impenetrable skepticism of old Europe, the small coffee house in the French Quarter of New Orleans and the courses and classes we were offering were an immediate success. The timing was perfect. It was 1967, and young people were searching for new ways to live, just as we had been when we created the process.
By 1967, the most famous people in the world are fascinated with the occult and varieties of esoteric pursuits.
It was kind of part of the ongoing circus.
Although we had a few Americans who had joined us in London, this new influx of people, American young men and women, pointed to much more fertile turf in the New World.
Son, don't let the man get you and do what it don't.
In those early days, when we were still a novelty on the streets of America, we could draw quite a crowd of interested people to these introductory sessions. The new world, it seemed, was ready for us. We incorporated as a church soon after the Omega moved to America in 1967. They settled into an elegant house bordering a bayou in Slidell, just outside New Orleans. An attorney was needed to conduct the business, and New Orleans, with its overlay of sensuous spirituality, felt an appropriate place to do it. Quite how we stumbled into the attorney, the late, great Tommy Bomer, others might recall. Perhaps it was his irreverent flamboyance that magnetized us together. He was already immensely fat, and as I picture him in my mind's eye, I see him hunched in a darkened office, an overhead fan barely disturbing the heavy, dank air. A lenticular cloud of cigar smoke hangs above his head like a dirty halo. He was gruff, cynical, rude, and very funny. We were charmed. Everything about Tommy Bomer was dark. He thought we were a great joke, and he loved the idea of turning us into a regular church. Much of the flowery, pompous language in the incorporation papers came directly from Tommy's fevered imagination. I'm going to interject here for a moment to highlight a modern-day discrepancy. July 15th, 2024, William Sims Bainbridge, yes, the sus lord himself, in one of his process groups on the internet, which I have a mole in one of these groups, but I will not identify which one. And I'm not telling tales outside of school, dear listeners. This is not new information, and they are aware and obviously not happy with me, but that might explain. Anyways, let's continue. The post reads, "The original incorporation document of the process, dated December 11th, 1967, says hardly anything about the theology or psychotherapy. It describes a complex church organization structure that includes a few features that became real, but adds much else that seems to imitate Orthodox or Catholic structures. Were the leaders actually planning along these lines, or was this just a tactic to assure state approval?" The link that Bainbridge provides is to my archive, where I have these incorporation documents uploaded. I consider William Sims Bainbridge as much of a reliable narrator as Timothy Wiley, but this is just my opinion, based off of my experiences with some of these people. I'm including this to show that we are still getting contradicting information today. Back to Wiley. "We had to talk him out of calling us the Church of Christ and Satan as being simply too provocative, finally settling on the Church of the Final Judgment." Just how did the process get hooked up with Tommy Jude Bomer Jr., and who is he? Let's start with Timothy Wiley's telling from Wisdom of the Washers, Teachings of the Rebel Angels on Earth's Forgotten Past. Mine host tells me he hasn't yet been able to recall who it was that recommended the New Orleans lawyer, Thomas Bomer Esquire, as the man to draw up the new church's incorporation papers. I've heard him say in the past that whomever it was must have had an extremely mischievous sense of humor. He reckoned it could have only been Mary Ann. Timothy Wiley goes on to reveal that it's his watcher who tells us what we're about to hear. Now I can confirm his supposition about the mischievous humor. It was, of course, Victoria, Emmett's mother, and the owner of the Seven Seas bar who'd made the recommendation.
All kinds of wild stuff used to happen in that bar. I imagine it still does. There's a three-legged dog sitting over there right now. My mother owned this place, and it was a very, very popular place amongst young people, alternative people, and it's where Tim Wiley and came into the bar and met my mom. My mom came home and she said, "I met these English guys, and why don't you go meet these people? They seem interesting." I was 13 at the time.
Just as it was mine host who'd initially approached Victoria for a recommendation when they were searching around for the appropriate lawyer. The man heard speaking in that recording, and who Wiley refers to as Emmett, is William Emmett Dwyer, also known as Brother Marcellus or Brother Mark. His mother at that time went by Victoria Fleming, and she ran the Seven Seas Bar, located at 515 St. Philip Street. And just a few doors away, there was none other than Mary Oneida Toop's occult shop. Victoria does have a very interesting family history. She was born Victoria Dora Pasternak to Samuel and Rose Pasternak. Reading from Samuel's obituary, June 27, 1963, in the Messenger Press. A retired musician, he played viola with the Victor Herbert Orchestra, New York Philharmonic, and under the baton of Toscanini at the Metropolitan Opera. He had recorded for Victor Records when his late brother, Joseph, was the musical director. From the Messenger Press, April 27, 1933. Mr. Pasternak is widely known in musical circles as one of the country's foremost players of the viola. For a number of years, a member of the Victor Concert Orchestra, he is now engaged in radio work as a member of the orchestra conducted by his brother, Joseph Pasternak, in New York. As for Victoria's uncle, Joseph Pasternak, from his New York Times obituary, April 30th, 1940. He was conductor of the Century Opera Company in New York, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and the Philadelphia Philharmonic Society. In 1916, he became musical director of the Victor Talking Machine Company, later RCA Victor, and the Stanley Company of America, owned by Warner Brothers. From 1928 until his death in 1940, he conducted orchestras for NBC Radio. Victoria passed away in 2004, and her obituary paints her as sort of a starving artist and her travels peddling her wares. I feel that it would be more appropriate to save Emmett and his parents for when we get into the Son of Sam timeline, discussing the children cult, as there are some very interesting connections. I think family history of these individuals, like Victoria, shows that maybe her family's connections to the entertainment industry, while the orchestra may not be the typical definition of the entertainment industry, she may know a guy who knows a guy, if you know what I mean. Going back to Wisdom of the Watchers. In process parlance, Tommy Bomer was an archetypal JS of the Jehovah Satan God pattern, which, of course, neatly resonated with Marianne's similar pattern. It was a natural fit. He boasted of his priesthood in the American Orthodox Catholic Church, explaining it as a Freemasonry sort of thing. The more he learned about the process belief system, the more he opened up to them. He claimed to have had some revelationary experiences with hypnotism, which naturally was of great interest to Marianne. And when she spoke endearingly of the passionate vitality the great Lord Satan gives us, Tommy's dark, bruised eyes swelled with reverent tears.
One of our windows were on the second floor, and it overlooked a restaurant. And I don't think we realized the extent of which we could be heard when we were giving services and things. And they were hearing us shouting Satan at the top of our voices and things like that, which was certainly done to provoke people in this room, but we didn't understand we were provoking everyone else as well outside the room.
Thomas Jude Bomer was evidently spawned from old New Orleans aristocracy, a fact he mentioned more than once in the meeting. This may have explained the streak of racism with which he was starting to color his conversation until he received no response or encouragement from the others. He must have imagined that Marianne's espousal of right-wing views would automatically include its customary dose of racism. Yet, the Oracle, for all her extreme opinions, was no racist. I'm going to keep my opinions about that commentary to myself, dear listener, but in regards to Thomas Jude Bomer, hailing from old New Orleans aristocracy. His father was Thomas Ferdinand Bomer and his mother, Miss Lucille Bomer. His father was born on September 5th, 1892, and on his naturalization documents from March of 1922, it lists that he was born in Switzerland, though I have not been able to find any proof of this. His father registered for the draft in 1942. At that time, he was working at the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans as a chef. His father does not otherwise exist on paper, and from everything that I have found, it does appear that he was possibly working for the OSS. I know, that's a bold claim. However, in his original petition for naturalization on October 11th, 1921, he lists himself as a Navy man. His father is listed on countless ship manifests as a chef, and while there is a Bomer with a different first name listed in the officers that worked for the Office of Strategic Services, the other fair consideration is that the OSS did work with the Navy, and the guise of a chef isn't that crazy in the grand scheme of things. With no family history of Thomas Bomer Sr., coupled with all of the other aforementioned information, at this time, I think that it's a strong theory, but it is just a theory. And obviously, if something more concrete can be put together, then I will give you guys an update. From the Times-Picayune, Tuesday, April 14th, 1964. man, 74, found dead of wound. Thomas Ferdinand Bomer of 1800 Gordon was found dead of a gunshot wound in the head in the yard of his home Monday. He was 74 years old. The death was placed under investigation by the coroner's office and police homicide division, but appears to have been self-inflicted. As an aside, there are a lot of suicides with the fathers of these individuals in the story. I just think it's weird and tragic. Continuing on. In regards to Wiley's claims about Bomer being interested in hypnotism, from the Times-Picayune, Friday, September 15, 1972, Thomas Jude Bomer Jr. joining the assessor race. In this article, it gives his resume and says at the very end that he is a member of the American Association of Ethical Hypnotists, but his interest in hypnotism predates this. From the Times-Picayune, New Orleans, April 22, 1969. Thomas Bomer, a New Orleans lawyer, will attend a special seminar on hypnosis, truth serum, and lie detection from May 1st to the 4th in Houston, Texas. The seminar is sponsored by the American College of Medical Hypnotists. Would it really be a process story if we didn't get into full-blown paranoia? The Sun-Herald, April 5, 1969. The American College of Medical Hypnotists will hold a special seminar on hypnosis, truth serum, and lie detection in Houston, Texas, starting on May 1st. The faculty will include defense lawyers F. Lee Bailey.
In a recent issue of the Saturday Evening Post, there is an article entitled "Renegade in the Courtroom." It goes on to say, luck, talent, and a go-go drive have turned a cocky ex-Marine into a top criminal lawyer, whom clients swear by and opponents swear at. Describing our guest, whom you see now, F. Lee Bailey. Your name is F. Lee Bailey. What does the F stand for?
Would you believe, Francis?
Melvin Belli.
Melvin Belli is an attorney sometimes more flamboyant he's accused of being than his clients. We know of him for his defense of Jack Ruby, his success in hundreds of criminal cases. He seems to live with accolades on the one hand and cries for his suspension on the other, but he remains a fascinating figure. Mr. Melvin Belli.
And Percy Foreman.
That's why I think the Lord leaves me here, and I don't know anybody that needs a lawyer, whether it's I or not. Whether he needs me, I mean. But at any rate, the theory of our jurisprudence is that a man's entitled to a lawyer of his choice, and Mr. Ruby, Jack Ruby, wanted me. And since he does want me, and since he needs me worse than anybody else I know in America at this moment, I accepted the case.
Dr. William J. Bryan, Jr., Director of the American Institute of Hypnosis and the first physician in the U.S. to practice medical hypnosis full-time, will be the chairman.
The theory we present here points to these efforts by the CIA to develop robot assassins, which frankly seem the stuff of fiction. But the agency's own documents prove that by the time of Robert Kennedy's murder, the CIA had taken serious steps to create programmed killers.
It in fact has happened, but the people who arranged this don't go around advertising that they do it or how they do it.
But there are always those who need to boast. William Bryan, Jr. was for almost a decade retained by the U.S. government as its leading hypno-programmer.
Use in criminal law, yes I am, I sure as hell am. You have to have the person locked up physically to have control over them. You have to use a certain amount of physical torture involved, and there is also the use of long-term hypnotic suggestion, probably drugs, whatever, and so on. Under these situations where you have all this going for you, like the prison camp and so on, yes, you can brainwash a person to do just about anything. What I'm speaking about are the innumerable instances that we ran into when I was running the country's brainwashing and anti-brainwashing programs.
Less than a year before his death in 1987, Bryan allegedly admitted to 2 prostitutes that he had hypno-programmed Sirhan Sirhan. This crucial clue is hearsay, so it's impossible to prove. But if it's true, it lends great strength to the theory, and it's only a theory, that the CIA had a hand in the murder of Robert Francis Kennedy.
Me speaking. If this is not the spookiest hypnotism convention that you've ever heard of, I don't know what will do it for you. The American College of Medical Hypnotists is suspicious by itself, but the fact that Tommy Bomer, a wandering bishop, and Dr. William J. Bryan Jr., a wandering bishop, who will become much more prevalent, along with Melvin Belli, when we discuss Sirhan. Granted, this is 1969. However, I do think that the fact that he was hanging out with some of the spookiest hypnotists and lawyers and doctor does lend credence to Tommy Bomer telling Marianne that he had some interesting experiences with hypnotism. Back to Timothy Wiley. Tommy Bomer had the charisma that small, fat, ugly men can sometimes employ to compensate for their physical limitations. His desire to impress the Omega took them all into some dark territories. He couldn't help hinting, for example, at his involvement with the Kennedy assassination a couple of years earlier, although when pressed on it he became coy, gave a stage wink, and then made a conspicuous display of maintaining his silence. He was a most unlikely conspirator. It turned out there may have been some truth to this because a couple of years later, he was bragging to Jim Garrison's investigation that he'd actually met Lee Harvey Oswald.
Mr. Garrison, are you saying, in effect, that beginning with the assassination of President Kennedy, that there is a fascist plot to take over this country?
Well, let's put it in more adult terms, if we can. Let's put it this way. We have today close to 500,000 men in Southeast Asia, including combat troops. Prior to John Kennedy's death, we had no combat troops in Asia. The tremendous escalation began after his death. So I am saying that the invasion of Vietnam was a direct result of the death of John Kennedy. Now, to go on to the word fascism, I would describe the type of government into which we have evolved as essentially fascist, yes.
Mr. Garrison, are you saying that members of the Pentagon ordered the president killed because of his opposition to the war in Vietnam?
I would say that the fact that the military of the United States was behind the murder of John Kennedy is so obvious that most of the people in the United States have to be aware of it. Of course, the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency were involved in the murder of John Kennedy, just as they were involved in the escalation in Vietnam which followed.
You mean direct involvement?
Of course.
Apparently, he'd talk freely about representing Guy Bannister.
Mr. Lewis, I understand that you work with Oswald in New Orleans.
We both worked for Guy Bannister, but he didn't pay us. We got paid from another source.
Who is Guy Bannister?
He was the head of the Chicago office of the FBI, and he also supplied guns for the Cuban refugees. And Lee told me this was a CIA operation.
What did Oswald do for Guy Bannister?
He went on to college campuses and he gathered information for the FBI. And he also recruited people to work for Guy Bannister.
And knowing David Ferry.
On Saturday, August the 26th, that articles appeared in the New Orleans newspapers accusing me of many things, including enticing juveniles to immorality by a combination of alcohol, hypnotism, and aviation. I was charged with flying juveniles into Cuba and sundry other things. 2 men driving one New Orleans police car came to my home one evening. I could not reach badge numbers or get the names from the blue identification cards in time. They agreed to help frame me. They were given a variety of charges that they could pick from: theft of an aircraft, jewel theft, armed robbery, dealing in contraband goods, dealing in contraband arms, illegal re-entry into the United States from flights over Cuba. Since I have direct knowledge of how some of the killings have been engineered in New Orleans by New Orleans police, some unidentified policemen threatened to have me killed. In adding all of this data, I considered my situation both fantastic and hopeless. From this moment on, I have lived in terror and with fear that nothing can save me from these people. I then fled in fear of my life.
and others implicated in the JFK assassination in the Oliver Stone movie, if not by the authorized version of the event. And if we dip into the realm of conspiracy theorists, we find Bomer's Masonic interests have him belonging to the same lodge, the Étoile Polaire Lodge of the French Grand Orient, as Don Carlos Marcello.
Many people have been linked to the assassination by various conspiracy theorists, but we know for certain that two people did commit crimes in Dallas that weekend, Lee Oswald and Jack Ruby. If one could show a unifying link between the two, surely that link would have become the focus of the investigation. The Warren Commission pictured them as lone wolves because, for reasons we'll explain later, the FBI never told the Warren Commission the pertinent facts. But the link between Oswald and Ruby did exist, and his name was Carlos Marcello,
the mafia big shot with whom David Ferrie was involved. How true Bomer's boasts were may never been known, but that didn't appear to concern Marianne or the other processians in his office that muggy day in the early spring of 1967. It was his grandiloquence and his fanfaronade, his extravagant pomposity and his easy relationship with the law. It was his outrageous humor and his cynicism that they appeared to find so appealing.
Thrown like a star in my vast sleep, I opened my eyes to take a peep, to find that I was by the sea, gazing with tranquility. Just then when the hurdy-gurdy man came singing songs of love, then when the hurdy-gurdy man came singing songs of love, hurdy-gurdy-gurdy gurdy sang. Hurdy-gurdy sang. Hurdy-gurdy sang. Histories of ages past, unenlightened shadows cast down through all eternity, the crying of humanity. 'Tis then when the hurdy-gurdy man comes singing songs of love. Then when the hurdy-gurdy man comes singing songs of love. Hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy sang. Hurdy-gurdy, 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 hurdy-gurdy. Hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy sang. Here comes a roly-poly man and he's singing songs of love. Roly-poly, 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 poly, he sang. Hurdy-gurdy, 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 he sang. Hurdy-gurdy, 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 he sang.
Perhaps Tommy Baumler's interaction with the process did have some moderating influence on him, because in 1974 he was consecrated as Bishop of the American Orthodox Catholic Church in Baton Rouge, although I suspect this may just have given Tommy another arena in which to make his mischief. I doubt if it would surprise anyone who knew Tommy Bomer to learn that he was one of those rebel angels who chose to incarnate in one of the earlier waves of reincarnates born over the course of the past century. It was after the meeting with the lawyer that Marianne and Robert took advantage of being in the city to go to the Royal Street chapter. I understand that neither Marianne nor Robert ever visited another chapter when it was functioning over the course of the Process Church's brief history. Me speaking, I will agree with Wiley on one thing: everything about Tommy Bomer is dark. Gotta love the low-key diss on Jim Garrison's investigation, chalking it up to the plot of a movie. No, we're not jumping into the black hole that is the JFK assassination. But I think, contextualizing the situation, the process, this random cult, comes to America and gets hooked up with this guy. We gotta get into JFK a little bit, guys. Tommy Bomer isn't the only connection. I'm going to state from the outset, I have not read any of Peter Levenda's literature at the time of this recording. If it is included from this moment forward, just know, I am citing it with a very small grain of salt, as I do Timothy Wiley. Regarding the Étoile Polaire Marcello connection, founded in 1794, the Lodge was a prominent white Creole association whose members included W.C.C. Claiborne, Louisiana's first governor. The first floor was used for public gatherings, and the second floor was reserved for private lodge functions, where rites were conducted in French until the 1950s. The building, constructed around 1840, is a striking 3-bay, 2-story Greek Revival structure. Masonic symbols adorn the building and the cast iron gate along Rampart Street, which dates to the 1880s. The lodge is still in use today. This is directly from their website. I can't find Tommy Bomer, partly because of the limited amount of information about this lodge online. However, I did find Thomas Ferdinand Bomer. That's right, Tommy Bomer's dad. He was a member. I can only trace him back as far as 1947 and as late as 1950 in what is archived online in the Louisiana Masonic Library and Museum. There's an excerpt from Garrison's files that has always stuck out to me regarding Mr. Bomer. File titled Jim Garrison Early Statements, Open Leads, November 14, 1967. Louise Davis, who is in the dredging business, may be a good source of information. Thomas Bomer, who works for Davis, for some time has been attempting to be retained by our office as an investigator. Bomer has been used for some years to penetrate liberal elements on college campuses and elsewhere in order to determine where the communists were. At the time of our preliminary hearing with Shaw, Art Kevin, a newsman from Los Angeles, visited Davis and Bomer at the latter's office. At that time, Bomer said, "We have a society of 70. We almost got control of it this time." Kevin states that Bomer laughed at further attempts to inquire concerning this statement. Bomer added that each person had to commit a murder to belong to it. Bomer then got mad and his hands shook. He produced a cane and pulled out the upper section, revealing a sword. He appeared very upset that proof was requested that he belonged to a society of 70 which was able to kill people. Bomer said that Martin had lied and that he was going to be left out. Bomer said that Martin lied specifically to our office concerning the conspirators who hung around Bannister's office, and that Lewis also lied. Our information indicates that Tommy Bomer was among those who went in and out of Bannister's office for several years in the early 60s. He, along with a young man named George Higginbotham, he has also been in trouble and has an arrest record which should be obtained, appeared to have been undercover agents for Bannister on the campus. Davis has advised another separate source of information that he was offered a multi-million-dollar contract to invade Cuba. This offer came from elements connected with the American Nazi Party. He stated that George Lincoln Rockwell was killed because he turned out to be a double agent. Davis appears to be a sincere, if somewhat militant, ultra-conservative, and may be of some help. When Lincoln Rockwell was arrested in New Orleans, he was bonded out by Hardy Davis, a local bondsman who appears to have had some connections with the David Ferry Group, and the indemnity to Hardy Davis for the bond was made by Louise Davis. No blood relation between the two. Just what Society of 70 Bomer was referring to, I don't know. I think it's very clear that regardless of what was going on, Tommy Bomer was involved in some dark stuff. Reading from Probe magazine, June 1997, The Wegman Files, discussing this Ferry crew, as it's called by some. Guy Johnson was also in a position to know about Bannister's association with Clay Shaw. As Davy notes, one of the most tantalizing facets of Shaw's career was his high-level security clearance coded QK Enchant. In recently declassified CIA files, either Johnson or his son, Guy Jr., also has a high-level CIA clearance. In a December 1981 interview, Bud Fensterwald talked to a former associate of Bannister's in New Orleans named Tommy Bomer. Garrison also knew of Bomer at the time of his investigation, but he was understandably tight-lipped with the DA. Years later, with little to worry about, he was more candid. In Fensterwald's handwritten notes of the interview, one line reads, "Shaw, Bannister, and Guy Johnson, intelligence apparatus for New Orleans." Further in the interview notes, Fensterwald writes that Bomer was very clear that Oswald worked for Bannister. Right below this, figuring even more into Oswald's New Orleans profile, Bomer stated that Bannister was able to give letters of marque, i.e. a license, to clear one with law enforcement officers so that, if you are caught as a communist, the letter will clear you of communist leanings. I think it's worth noting here that Guy Johnson was a former lieutenant commander in the Navy in World War II and former assistant DA in New Orleans. In 1950, he was granted a top-secret clearance by the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI. It shouldn't surprise anybody that ONI is going to continue to come up in the process timeline, and that's why I wanted to point this out. From General Walker and the murder of President Kennedy, the extensive new evidence of a radical right-wing conspiracy by Jeffrey Caulfield, another young Nazi, Tommy Bomer, worked undercover for Bannister searching for subversives at Tulane University. Bannister investigator and author Harold Weisberg told the author that Bomer had lost the use of his legs and was able to ambulate with the assistance of a dolly. Bomer was a person of interest in Garrison's investigation. He bragged that he and Davis were Nazis and talked about the big takeover to come. Me speaking here, I believe that the operations that Guy Bannister's team was involved in regards to infiltrating these, liberal or left-leaning or communist movements on college campuses is important to include here because a little bit further down in our timeline, I have connected the Process Church of the Final Judgment directly with the Students for a Democratic Society during the Columbia riot. I'm not making the insinuation that the process was working with Guy Bannister. I'm trying to highlight the similarities of certain operations. This last JFK-specific citation is to plant a seed in regards to when we discuss what happened in Rome. A Farewell to Justice, author and professor Joan Mellon writes, the most notorious OAS-sponsored effort was the attempted assassination of Charles de Gaulle in 1962. Guy Bannister operative Tommy Bomer remarked that those who killed John F. Kennedy were those who wanted to kill de Gaulle. He was referring to the CIA, Clay Shaw, Bannister, and Permindex, Permanent Industrial Exhibition, based in Switzerland. That possible Permindex connection, though. Focusing just on Tommy Jude Bomer, Timothy Wiley mentions Bomer being consecrated into the American Orthodox Catholic Church in Baton Rouge. This is sort of true. The Tennessean, Saturday, August 31st, 1974, discussing the Eastern Orthodox Church American jurisdiction at the Church of the Redeemer, they cite Reverend Thomas Jude Bomer, D.D., Orthodox Bishop of New Orleans. So, a completely independent source verifying that he was indeed a bishop of the AOCC. And here we arrive at Episcopi Vagantes, the Wandering Bishops. We're going to end here for now, dear listener, and next episode, we're going to get into some of the weirdness of the group, but I try to roll with what I can prove, and I'm going to do my best to stick to that and let you know when the sources that I'm using leave something to be desired. With the Wandering Bishops comes the Discordians. Oh yes, we've got witches, Discordians, and the architects of the Gnostic Mass. My hope is, once we really get the feel for that Bayou vibe, then we can read through the processes incorporation documents and see if it was really just Tommy Bomer's fevered imagination. I'd like to end with a quote from Fred Chrisman, November 1st, 1968. Urging his readers to establish small training cells for the purpose of agitation and propaganda, he says, "Eventually, we will win this war for the minds of the youth of America. This is what to do until sanity returns."